Hey everyone, and welcome back to Vitality Vibes. Today we're talking about self-preservation. And, it's not just about running from tigers anymore, right? It's
Right.
really about how we protect ourselves mentally, emotionally, even socially in
Mhm.
today's world.
Yeah.
And the source material you provided for this is really interesting. I think there's going to be some really fascinating takeaways for our listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. It's fascinating how self-preservation is really woven into our biology, our psychology.
Yeah.
I mean, it's such a powerful force that really shapes so much of our behavior.
Okay, so let's break this down. Like, we all know that classic fight or flight response, right?
Hmm.
You slam on your brakes to avoid an accident, your heart's pounding, you're on high alert. Your whole system shifts into survival mode.
Yeah.
But here's the thing, our bodies react with that same intensity to things like work deadlines or like social media meltdowns.
Yeah, and you've hit on a really crucial point here. We're facing this biological mismatch where our bodies haven't quite grasped that, a stressful email isn't actually a life or death threat.
Right.
But our ancient wiring kind of treats it as such,
Uh,
which leads to that chronic stress, which can really impact our well-being.
I mean, what does this actually mean for us practically? We can't escape these demands, right?
Right. It means we need to become masters at managing that stress. We need to develop those strategies and tools
Uh,
to regulate our nervous system so we're not constantly in that fight or flight mode.
I'm already feeling a little stressed just thinking about it.
Yeah.
But that's such an important point. It brings us to this idea of psychological self-preservation.
Yeah.
So it's not just about physical survival, right?
Yeah.
It's about safeguarding our identity, our self-worth,
Right.
our mental and emotional well-being.
Exactly. Think about it as building that internal resilience, developing that mental armor to kind of navigate the challenges that life inevitably throws our way.
Yeah.
And for that, we need a diverse toolkit of coping strategies.
Okay, so what are some of the tools in this toolkit? Because, some coping mechanisms are healthier than others, right?
Right.
Like I know facing a problem head on is probably more effective than, burying our heads in the sand.
Absolutely. Those proactive coping strategies like problem solving, seeking support from trusted individuals, really engaging in healthy self care. These are invaluable tools, but we also have those, less healthy reactive coping mechanisms like avoidance, denial, rationalization
Yeah.
that we tend to rely on when we feel overwhelmed. But it's important to remember that, even these less ideal strategies are still tools. They're just imperfect ones that help us navigate those difficult situations.
Yeah, it's like they're a temporary shield, but they're not necessarily the best long-term solution.
Exactly.
And I think we've all been there. Avoiding that difficult conversation, pretending a problem doesn't exist.
Hmm.
It's self-preservation in action, even if it's not the most effective approach.
Precisely. And the key here is to recognize those patterns
Mm.
and gradually shift towards those healthier, more sustainable ways of protecting ourselves.
Yeah.
It's about developing that self-awareness so that we can make conscious choices that support our well-being rather than just, reacting out of habit.
This is where I think things get really interesting for me. Because self-preservation isn't just an individual thing, right?
Right.
It really spills over into how we interact with the world, particularly, in our social lives. We care about our relationships, our reputations, our place within different groups.
Yeah, this brings us to this concept of social self-preservation.
Mm.
Think about how we might hold back our opinions in a group to avoid conflict, or, how carefully we craft our online personas.
Yeah.
It's about navigating those social dynamics in a way that minimizes those potential threats to our social standing and our sense of belonging.
It's fascinating, right? Have you ever felt that pressure to conform, either online or offline? Maybe biting your tongue when you really wanted to speak up, or, feeling like you had to present a certain version of yourself to be accepted. That's social self-preservation at play, and I think it can be a real balancing act.
It is, especially in today's hyper-connected world, where social media kind of amplifies the pressure to fit in and project this flawless image. Yeah, the challenge is finding that balance between authenticity and self-protection.
So what does healthy social self-preservation look like? Does it mean always speaking our minds regardless of the consequences? Or is there a more nuanced approach?
It's about discernment. It's about learning to choose our battles wisely, recognizing when to assert ourselves and when to strategically, hold back. And it's about building genuine connections with people who value us for who we are,
Yeah.
creating that supportive network that allows us to be more authentic and vulnerable.
So it's about creating those safe spaces,
Hmm.
where we can actually let our guard down a little bit,
Yeah.
knowing we won't be judged or rejected.
Right.
And that brings us to relationships. I mean, they're such a fundamental part of human experience. They offer incredible support and connection. But they can also be a source of stress and potential harm if we're not careful.
Yeah, you've touched upon a really crucial point here. Self-preservation is paramount in relationships. Healthy, fulfilling relationships require a delicate balance between giving, receiving, and protecting ourselves.
So how do we strike that balance? What does healthy self-preservation actually look like in the context of our closest relationships?
It starts with establishing healthy boundaries, communicating our needs openly and honestly, and ensuring we feel safe emotionally. These are all forms of self-preservation that nurture strong, lasting connections. They allow us to be vulnerable and authentic without that fear of judgment or rejection.
But what happens when those boundaries get blurred? Like in those codependent relationships we hear about, it seems like self-preservation can get lost in the mix there.
It's a great observation. In those codependent relationships, where our sense of self becomes entangled with another person, it can be incredibly difficult to prioritize our own well-being. We might sacrifice our needs, our values, even our sense of identity just to maintain that relationship.
It's like we lose sight of where our own needs and boundaries begin and end. And, that can lead to resentment, exhaustion, even emotional harm. So how do we break free from those unhealthy patterns?
It often requires having those tough conversations, setting firmer boundaries, and sometimes even seeking outside support, from therapists or support groups.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that prioritizing our own well-being isn't selfish. It's essential for building those healthy and fulfilling relationships.
And that's especially true in family dynamics, right? Where those patterns of behavior can be so ingrained. Sometimes self-preservation in families means addressing those toxic relationships, limiting contact, or seeking therapy to help us navigate those complexities. It can be incredibly challenging. But, ultimately prioritizing our well-being is an act of self-love and empowerment.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that we deserve to be treated with respect, with compassion, and with kindness, even within our own
I
families.
see.
And that sometimes self-preservation means making those difficult choices to protect ourselves from harm.
Yeah, I think this conversation has been so insightful so far. And, I'm already feeling a little more empowered to take charge of my own well-being. But there's one aspect of self-preservation I think we need to address, and that's how it's evolving in the digital age. I mean, we were constantly bombarded with information pressure to present this perfect online persona. And, we've got the addictive nature of social media.
Right.
It's a whole new ballgame.
You're absolutely right. The digital age has introduced this unique set of challenges to the self-preservation game. Now protecting ourselves also means safeguarding our mental and emotional well-being in these digital spaces.
So what are some practical strategies for navigating this digital landscape without sacrificing our sanity?
It's about establishing digital boundaries, just like we do in our offline lives. Being mindful of our screen time, being selective about the content we consume, and, consciously curating our online experiences. It's about using technology as a tool to enhance our lives, not detract from them.
It's like we need to develop this whole new set of digital self-defense skills.
Hmm.
Because, let's be real, it's so easy to get sucked into that vortex of
Yeah,
comparison, negativity, FOMO that often permeates social media.
exactly. Ask yourself, am I in control of my technology? Or is it controlling me? It's a question I think we all need to grapple with in this digital age.
It's so relevant, and I'm sure our listeners are resonating with this. We're all trying to find that balance, right?
Yeah.
Between engaging with this digital world and staying grounded in the real world.
That balance is key. It's about recognizing that technology is a tool. And like any tool, it can be used for good or for ill.
Yeah.
The power lies in our hands to choose how we engage with it.
That's such an empowering perspective. It's not about demonizing technology. It's about using it consciously
Yeah.
and intentionally to support our well-being. And that brings us to, I think, a really important distinction: self-preservation versus self-care.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Those terms are often used interchangeably, but there's a subtle yet crucial difference. Self-preservation is primarily about survival. It's a reactive response to protect ourselves from harm. Self-care, on the other hand, is more proactive. It's about nurturing our overall well-being, fostering resilience, and cultivating joy.
Can you give us an example of how these two concepts might play out in real life?
Absolutely. Imagine a situation where you're dealing with a toxic individual. Setting boundaries to limit your interactions with them. That would be an act of self-preservation. It's about protecting yourself from that immediate emotional harm. However, Engaging in activities that nourish your mind, your body, and your spirit. Things like spending time in nature, practicing mindfulness, pursuing creative endeavors. Those would fall under the umbrella of self-care.
So it's not an either or situation, it's a both hand.
It is.
We need both self-preservation and self-care to really thrive.
Precisely. It's about finding that synergy between protecting ourselves and nurturing ourselves. Creating a life that feels both safe and fulfilling.
I love that. But it makes me wonder, can we have too much self-preservation?
Hmm.
Like if we're constantly protecting ourselves, are we also potentially limiting our growth?
Mhm.
This is the thought that's been swirling around in my mind.
That's a fantastic question. And you've hit on a really important point. Too much self-preservation can create a life that feels secure but also stagnant. We might avoid taking risks, stepping outside of our comfort zones, or pursuing opportunities that could lead to personal and professional growth.
It's like we're building a fortress around ourselves, protecting ourselves from potential harm, but also shutting ourselves off from experiences that could really enrich our lives.
Exactly. And that's where that balance comes in. It's about recognizing when self-preservation is serving us and when it might be holding us back. It's about finding that sweet spot between security and growth, between protecting ourselves and pushing our boundaries.
Yeah, I think that's such a valuable takeaway for our listeners. It's one small risk I can take today to push myself a little bit, to learn something new, to connect with someone new, to experience something outside of my usual routine.
Beautifully said. It's about remembering that self-preservation isn't about staying stagnant. It's about building the strength and resilience to navigate life's ups and downs while still allowing ourselves to evolve and expand.
I love that perspective. And it ties in perfectly with the actionable strategies we'll be diving into in the next part of this Vitality Vibe. Stay tuned.
It's amazing how much we've uncovered, just by exploring this concept of self-preservation,
Yeah.
from, our biological wiring to
Yeah.
social dynamics to, even our relationship with technology. It really touches every aspect of our lives.
It does. And I think what's becoming clear to me is that self-preservation isn't really about, hiding from the world
Mm.
or, becoming overly cautious. It's really about equipping ourselves with the tools and the strategies we need to navigate the world effectively, but still stay true to ourselves.
Precisely. And, one of the most powerful tools in our self-preservation arsenal is really the ability to tune into our bodies. Our bodies are incredibly intelligent systems,
Yeah.
and they're constantly sending us signals about what they need.
So it's about paying attention to those signals,
Right.
those whispers of discomfort, stress, or depletion. And then even more importantly, honoring those signals by giving ourselves what we need.
Exactly. It might be a break from work to stretch and move, a few minutes of deep breathing to calm our nervous system, or a nourishing meal to replenish our energy. It's about recognizing that self-care isn't a luxury, it's a fundamental aspect of self-preservation.
And sometimes self-care is as simple as saying no, right? Setting boundaries, as we've discussed, is crucial for protecting our time, our energy, our overall well-being. It's about recognizing our limits and communicating them clearly to others.
Boundaries are essential in all areas of our lives, work, relationships, even our interactions online.
Yeah.
It's about having the courage to say no to things that drain us, overextend us, or don't align with our values.
It can be tough though, right? Especially when we're so conditioned to, please others or, worry about disappointing people. But setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's about honoring our own needs and creating those healthy, sustainable relationships.
You're absolutely right. And, sometimes setting boundaries also means limiting our exposure to negativity. This could involve being selective about the news we consume, curating our social media feeds to minimize, that negativity and the drama, or even creating some distance from people who consistently bring negativity into our lives.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. Negativity can be so draining, and it's often contagious. If we're constantly bombarded with negativity, it can seep into our own thoughts and emotions, and then it makes it so much harder to stay grounded and resilient.
Precisely. Protecting our mental and emotional well-being requires being mindful of the information and the energy that we allow into our lives. It's about choosing sources of inspiration, positivity, and support.
So it's not about living in a bubble and ignoring the world's problems, but it's about being discerning and intentional about what we expose ourselves to.
Exactly. And in the digital age, this is particularly important. Social media, while offering these incredible opportunities for connection and information sharing, can also be a breeding ground for comparison, negativity, and FOMO.
So how do we navigate this digital landscape without getting swept away by all that negativity?
It's about, being mindful of our social media consumption, setting limits on our screen time, being selective about the accounts that we follow, and consciously choosing content that uplifts, inspires, and supports our well-being. It's about using social media as a tool to enhance our lives, not to detract from them.
Yeah, I think that's such a valuable reminder for all of us. It's so easy to get caught up in that endless scroll and lose track of how it's impacting our mood and our energy.
It really is. And, in addition to managing our external environment, cultivating a positive mindset is another powerful self-preservation strategy.
Oh, absolutely. I'm a big believer in the power of mindset. Our thoughts have such a profound impact on our feelings, our behaviors, our overall well-being.
Exactly. It's about, recognizing those negative thought patterns, the self-criticism, the worry, the catastrophizing, and consciously choosing to shift them. This might involve practicing gratitude, focusing on our strengths, reframing challenges as opportunities for growth, or even engaging in positive self-talk.
It's about being our own best cheerleaders, right? Celebrating our wins, acknowledging our efforts, and, offering ourselves compassion when we stumble.
Beautifully said. And, in addition to nurturing our inner landscape, our social connections play a vital role in self-preservation.
Yeah, we're social creatures by nature, right?
We are
We thrive in connection.
exactly cultivating strong, supportive relationships
Hmm.
is one of the most powerful things we can do for our well-being.
So it's about finding those people who make us feel seen, heard, and valued. Those who lift us up, challenge us to grow, and offer a safe space to be vulnerable.
Precisely. And it's about being willing to ask for help when we need it. Recognizing that we don't have to go through life's challenges alone.
That can be tough for some people, though.
Yeah.
I know I've struggled with asking for help in the past. It's like there's this stigma attached to admitting vulnerability. But, the truth is there's strength in vulnerability.
Absolutely. It takes courage to reach out to let others see our struggles and to accept support. But those connections, those bonds of mutual care and understanding, are essential for navigating life's inevitable ups and downs.
And sometimes self-preservation means recognizing when we need more than just the support of friends and family, right?
Right.
Sometimes it means seeking professional help.
You're absolutely right. There's no shame in seeking therapy or counseling. It's a sign of strength, not weakness, to acknowledge when we need additional support.
It's about recognizing that we all have blind spots. And sometimes we need a trained professional to help us see those patterns, challenge those limiting beliefs, and, develop healthier coping strategies.
Exactly. Therapy can be an incredibly valuable tool for self-discovery, healing, and growth. It provides a safe and supportive space to explore our challenges, to develop new perspectives, and to build the skills that we need to thrive.
I think what we're really highlighting here
Mm.
is that self-preservation is this multifaceted journey, right?
It is.
It's about taking care of our physical, mental, emotional, and social well-being. It's about recognizing our needs, setting boundaries, cultivating a positive mindset, and building strong connections.
And it's about, understanding that we are worthy of care and protection,
Yeah.
that our well-being matters.
That is such an important message, and I'm so grateful that we're having this conversation. It's about creating a life that feels aligned with our values, that
Mm.
brings us joy, and that allows us to show up in the world as our best selves.
Beautifully said. And it's about remembering that self-preservation is an ongoing journey, not a destination.
Yeah, it's about learning, growing, evolving as we go, constantly refining our self-preservation strategies as our needs and circumstances change.
Yeah. Exactly. And it's about recognizing that, we're all in this together. We're all navigating the complexities of the modern world, and we all need these tools and strategies to thrive.
Yeah, this has been such an insightful conversation,
Yeah.
and I'm sure our listeners are feeling empowered to really prioritize their own well-being.
I hope so. It's been a pleasure exploring this topic with you.
Thank you so much for sharing your insights. And now, in the final part of this Vitality Vibes episode, we'll be discussing how these self-preservation strategies can be applied in very specific areas of our lives, from our careers to our relationships to our personal growth. We'll be back right after this short break. Welcome back to Vitality Vibes. We've been having such a great conversation about self-preservation, exploring how important it is for navigating this crazy modern life. But let's shift gears a little bit and talk about how these principles can play out in specific areas of our lives,
Okay.
like starting with our careers. I mean, the workplace can be so demanding. You've got the pressure to perform the long hours, the constant connectivity. It's easy to feel completely overwhelmed and just depleted,
Oh.
especially if we're not prioritizing our well-being.
Absolutely. And In today's, fast-paced work culture, I think it's more important than ever to establish those healthy boundaries, to really protect our time, our energy, and our mental space. This might involve setting clear expectations about work hours, limiting, after-hours email checks, learning to say no to taking on more than we can realistically handle.
Yeah, it's about recognizing that we're not machines, right?
Right.
We can't operate at peak performance if we're constantly pushing ourselves beyond our limits. And I think burnout is a real threat these days.
It is.
And self-preservation is the antidote.
Precisely. And, beyond setting boundaries, prioritizing self-care is crucial for really thriving in our careers. This might involve taking regular breaks throughout the day to, move our bodies, practice mindfulness, or even just step away from our screens for a little bit. It might also mean, making time for activities we actually enjoy outside of work, things that nourish our souls and recharge our batteries.
It's about remembering that our well-being is an asset, not a liability. When we take care of ourselves, we're more focused, more creative, and more resilient in the face of all these challenges. And, that benefits not only us, but our employers and our colleagues as well.
Now let's shift our focus to relationships. We've talked about the importance of boundaries and emotional safety in our connections. Healthy self-preservation in relationships is about honoring our own needs and values. While also respecting the needs and values of others, it's about creating a dynamic where both individuals feel seen, heard, and supported.
Yeah, it's about recognizing that we don't have to compromise ourselves to be in a relationship. In fact, the healthiest relationships are those where both individuals feel empowered to be their authentic selves.
Absolutely. And sometimes, self-preservation in relationships means having those difficult conversations, addressing the issues that are causing tension or resentment, and setting boundaries when necessary. It can be challenging, especially if we're kind of conflict avoidant by nature, but it's essential for building those strong, lasting connections.
And it's important to remember, self-preservation doesn't just apply to romantic relationships. It also applies to friendships, family dynamics, and even professional relationships as well.
That's right. Every relationship has its own unique dynamics and its own challenges, but the underlying principle of self-preservation remains the same. Honoring our own needs, communicating clearly, and creating a space where we feel safe and respected.
And speaking of growth, it might seem counterintuitive, but I think self-preservation is actually essential for personal and professional growth.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Often we think of growth as pushing ourselves beyond our comfort zones, taking risks, and embracing challenges. And while those things are certainly important, they can only be sustainable if we have a solid foundation of self-preservation.
It's like that analogy we used earlier about building a base camp before you climb a mountain, right? You
Yeah.
need to be well rested, well nourished,
Yeah,
and well equipped to handle the rigors of the journey ahead.
exactly. If we're constantly pushing ourselves to the point of exhaustion or burnout, we're not setting ourselves up for success. Self-preservation allows us to take those risks and embrace those challenges from a place of strength and resilience.
It's about recognizing that growth isn't a linear process. There will be times when we need to step back and recharge. And, there'll be times when we need to push ourselves beyond our perceived limits. The key is to listen to our inner wisdom and find that balance between challenge and support.
Beautifully said. It's about recognizing that we're all on our own unique journeys, and there's no one-size-fits-all approach to personal growth. What matters is that we're moving in a direction that feels aligned with our values and our aspirations, and that we're taking care of ourselves along the way.
I think this conversation has really highlighted something important. Self-preservation isn't about being selfish or withdrawing from the world. It's about taking ownership of our well-being, honoring our needs, and creating a life that feels both authentic and fulfilling.
And it's about recognizing that our well-being is interconnected with the well-being of others. When we prioritize self-preservation, we show up in the world as more present, more compassionate, more resilient individuals. We're better able to support our loved ones, contribute to our communities, and make a positive impact on the world.
What a powerful message to end on. It's not just about taking care of ourselves, it's about creating this ripple effect of positive change that extends outwards, touches the lives of those around us, and makes the world a better place.
I couldn't agree more. It's been such a pleasure exploring this with you today.
Thank you so much for sharing your insights. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on Vitality Vibes. We hope this conversation has inspired you to prioritize your own well-being and embrace that transformative power of self-preservation. Until next time.